BRAC Community Forum. My name is Darren Lee. I am on the board of directors for the Heart of Georgia Energy Coalition, as well as I have the honor of being a city councilman for the city of Warner Robins, Georgia. At this time, if you have any cell phones or other electronic devices, please silence them, please. As a representative of the board, I'd like to start by thanking our event sponsor and facilitator, the 21st Century Partnership. We have some very distinguished guests here today, and we would like to thank them for coming and showing their commitment to the continued economic success, not just for Middle Georgia, but also for the entire state of Georgia. From U.S. Congressman Sachs Chandler's office, we have Mr. Bill Stembridge. From U.S. Senator Johnny Isaac's office, we have Andrew Blaskovich. We have with us today Georgia State Senator Ross Tollison. We have from the House and County Commissioners, Commissioner Tom McMichael, H.J. Walker, Larry Thompson, Gail Robinson. We also have our area mayors here today. We have Mayor of Centerville, John Harley. We have the Mayor of Perry, Mayor Jimmy Faircloth. We also have Councilman Mike Daly and also Councilwoman Carolyn Robbins here today. From Robbins Air Force Base, we have with us Brigadier General Cedric George, Commander, Warner Robins Air Logistics Center, Colonel Mitch Butekoffer, Commander, 78th Air, Base Wing and Installation Commander, Robbins Air Force Base, Mr. Otis Hicks, Director, 78th Civil Engineering Group, Mr. James Willingham, Deputy Director, 78th Civil Engineer Group. Members of the Board of Directors for the Heart of Georgia Energy Coalition with us today are Cheryl Frazier, Executive Director of Warner Robins Housing Authority, Dr. D. Sams, Georgia College and State University, Dr. Kalinda Manilov from Georgia College and State University, Dr. Art Howard, President of HGC, Jalen Hutnell, Executive Director of the Heart of Georgia Energy Coalition, and our interns Adam Hutnell, Wes Harper, and Andrew Penrod. Now please join me in welcoming to the stage members of the 2005 BRAC Commission, General Tom Hill, Commissioner Phillip Coyle, and BRAC and Community Residence Project Director, Dr. Andrea Morris. And finally, without further ado, our facilitator for this afternoon, Major General Bob McMahon.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you all very much for being here. There are two groups of people today in Middle Georgia. Those that are in this room and those that either want to be or should be to hear what I think is going to be an absolutely remarkable conversation between all of us and three folks who have not only talked the talk on BRAC, but also walked the walk as well. To all of you, thank you very much again for being here. To our distinguished guests, thank you for being here. To the three of you that we did not introduce as we went through and go through that long list, we apologize. We'll get you on the next round by name, but we are delighted to have a full contingent of folks to be here as being part of this. As you all know, nothing generates greater concern or fear in the heart of a defense community than four letters: BRAC. We've had 5 previous rounds of BRAC. Where we are today with the current round, interesting day as it might have been, the President has requested another round of BRAC as part of his 2014 presidential submission. We've heard a great deal of conversation from members of Congress about whether or not that will in fact occur. Released earlier today, interestingly enough, was draft language for the 2014 National Defense Authorization Act before our Congress begins to work it. Included in that was obviously the language that's being proposed for another round of BRAC 2014. In terms of giving you some idea of what that timeline would look like if it were in fact approved and authorized by our Congress, that authorization would take place as part of the authorization of the 2014 National Defense Authorization Act. The actual commission that would oversee the process would be put in place in the spring of 2015, and they would have until essentially the spring of 2016 to complete their work. What that means is if in fact this were to be approved by our Congress, that the data that we are collecting today throughout the nation would be the data that would be used in assessing where we are and in fact what would happen. It is for all those reasons that there is this sense of fear when we talk about the word BRAC. And yet, it is tremendously important for all of us to remember that in a BRAC process, there are both winners and losers. And we in Middle Georgia and Robins Air Force Base understands the winning side of that. As you look at the workloads that were brought to Middle Georgia as part of the 1995 BRAC, the most obvious being the C-5 work that came from San Antonio, along with the automatic test equipment, and some of the electronic warfare work that was brought out of San Antonio here. And again in 2005 with the Marine unit coming here, as well as the establishment of a strategic distribution hub for the Defense Logistics Agency. And so it is tremendously important to remember as we go through this process that there are both winners and losers, and that our job is to do whatever we can to ensure that if there is another round of BRAC, that we are in that side as a gainer of this process. Our goal today is very simple. We want to demystify this thing we call BRAC. All of us have heard about it. All of us have read about it. Most of those who have been around for a few years have had the opportunity to experience it, and yet very few truly understand. And so we are blessed to have with us today three folks who truly understand this process. In just a moment, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their background, and then we'll get into really what is a structured question and answer period. As an administrative note, many of you picked up a white 3x5 card when you came in. The intent of that card is to write questions that you might have that will be then passed to me. We have folks that will be walking up and down both sides that if you hold it up in the air, they will pick it up from you. If you need another 2 or 3 or 5 3x5 cards to ask follow-on questions, you're welcome to do that. And our intent is to make this as engaging as possible throughout the afternoon. Before we begin, this is to make sure that the audience is in fact awake, and to ensure that there is an audience participation part of this, I have a series of 3 questions that I would like you to answer for us before we go through this process. Answering is simply raising either your right hand or your left hand. You don't need to raise either, but raising one or the other would be a good thing, if it's appropriate. So, question 1 for the audience. How many of you believe that there is actually at least a 51% chance that there'll be a BRAC authorized as part of the 2014 National Defense Authorization Act? How many believe it actually will be? How many don't believe it will be? Okay. Question 2. Assuming there is a BRAC authorized, how many of you believe that there is a chance, at least a 51% chance, that Robins Air Force Base would either be downsized or closed? Raise your hand. How many of you do not believe that Robbins, there's at least a 51% chance that Robbins would either be downsized or closed? Go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. Third question. How many of you, regardless of your answer on question number 2, believe that we as a community ought to be aggressively taking actions today to prepare for a next round of BRAC, regardless of what we think is going to occur? Okay? Any of you not think that we ought to be doing that? Okay. Well, that provides all 4 of us with at least an initial sense. And what I'd like to do now, starting with Mr. Coyle, a short introduction of yourself, your background, and in our 2 commissioners' cases, who appointed you, and any initial thoughts that you might have before we begin. Sir? And I think I've got I stole your microphone. It'd be even easier if I gave you that.
Thank you. Phil Coyle. My most recent government service was in the first Obama administration, where I was Associate Director for National Security and International Affairs in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Before that, with General Hill, served on the 2005 BRAC Commission, appointed by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, nominated by President Bush, and something that might happen this time also. None of the commissioners were ever confirmed by the Senate. The Senate was so divided about having a BRAC, which I think will be the situation again this time, that neither our chairman, Tony Principi, nor any of the other BRAC commissioners were confirmed, and so President Bush put us in for what are called recess appointments. And the process goes so fast that that was enough time for us to do the BRAC. But one of the tricky parts of all of this. Before serving on the BRAC Commission, I spent a little over 7 years in the Pentagon serving as Assistant Secretary for Test and Evaluation. And I won't bore you with the rest, but before that, many years at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, National Security Research Center that's out in California.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Andrea Morris, and I am the BRAC and Community Resilience Director for Arlington, Virginia. That little bitty 26 square mile space that inhabits the Pentagon. Very proud to say that. I have been working for Arlington County since 2005. BRAC was announced in May 2005. I came on board in September, October 2005, and began the work of understanding what in the world will this mean for us. A long story, very interesting story I'm happy to share with you. Prior to that, I have done work, DC government. I was completing my dissertation, very honestly, that took a lot of time. I'm very grateful that that's done. But my background's in economic development, urban policy, community resilience in particular, which means a lot of things. It's much more than hazard and disaster. It really is equipping and preparing a community to withstand any type of action that occurs to it, and to position it to recover and expand and grow. And that is a wealth of activity, from economic development to planning to education, transportation, mental public health, of course the emergency services as well. So it is a very comprehensive approach to making a community work and helping it to thrive. And that really is my passion. I'm from an urban community in Indianapolis, and I have a lot of experience with policy being made without my input. That's very important, so I'll leave it at that. We'll look forward to the conversation ahead of us.
I'm General Tom Hill. I spent almost 37 years in uniform United States Army. I started the Army in 1968 at Fort Benning, Georgia. For BRAC process, I had 3 different large installation commands. I commanded the 25th Infantry Division and United States Army Hawaii, which is all the installations in Hawaii. I commanded Fort Lewis and 1st Corps and Fort Lewis, all the Army installation at Fort Lewis, Washington. And then my final job, my 4-star job, I was the Southern Command Commander in Miami, responsible for all activities, U.S. military activities in Latin America. The process of the BRAC commissioners are, there are 9 commissioners, 3 appointed by the President, 3 appointed by the House, and 3 from the Senate. I was a presidential appointee. President Bush appointed me, and I had been pushed through President Bush by the Army. They wanted an Army guy on it. And by Jeb Bush, because I was living in Florida, and he wanted me on it, because I understood Florida. Interestingly enough, I had never heard from Governor Bush to push anything, and I never heard from the Army to push anything except in a public manner once I'd been appointed. And I think that what really helped me along with the BRAC process is I retired in January '05, and we were all appointed in April '05, so I was very current in all those issues. And on our BRAC commission, there were 3 former 4-stars, an Air Force 4-star, Fig Newton, a Navy 4-star, Hal Gaiman, myself, an Air Force 1-star retired nurse, our resident scientist, Mr. Coyle, former Secretary of Transportation and Chief of Staff of the White House, Sam Skinner, a former Veterans Affairs Director, our Chairman, Tony Principi, and then 2 former congressmen, 1 retired congressman, 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. That was the makeup of the commission.
Sir, I'm going to have you hold on to that because the first question is going to go to you. And then we'll work our way start off between you and Mr. Coyle. Talk a little bit, if you would, from the time that you were appointed through the time that the commission was stood down, just in that timeline of a year or so, what you did, what took place in terms of the process, and then what I'll do, Mr. Coyle, I'd like you to talk maybe as much as you can fill in of what happened prior to actually the commission standing up, what the services were doing and what the department was doing.
Okay. We all got nominated in early, we were supposed to be nominated and confirmed by the Senate in April. The commission report, the recommendation came from the Secretary. Can I back up a second?
Yes, sir.
Let me start at the very beginning. The services...
Sir, you have had 4 stars, I had 2. You can do whatever you darn well want.
That never bothered anybody before. The whole process starts with the departments, the services, going out and gathering data, and they do so without telling anyone that they're looking at them for BRAC. General George will get questionnaires that everybody in the Air Force will get, and they will assume that they'll collect data. There's a very small staff inside the department that will collate that data and develop the Secretary of Defense's recommendations for BRAC, for either realignment, closing, changing, whatever you want to do. That then is made public, and in our case, we were all appointed in early April. It was made public on May the 15th or 16th, as I remember, and we did our first hearing with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff 2 or 3 days later. Yeah, that's you, I think. And then there is a staff that's formed, about 100-person staff, with a BRAC staff chairman and a director, and they will do the analysis for the commission. The law required, and it'll have to be a different law this time, but I suspect it will be the same, the law required 2 commissioners to visit any location that had 300 people affected for job loss or realignment. So that entailed a whole lot of travel for the commissioners and the staff guys. So we got nominated in April. The president gave us the quick nomination, or the confirmation, out of session confirmation, I forgot the term. We began work in May, and in August, we had the vote. So we had essentially 4 months to have the staff look at all of it, and for us to look at it. 2 other points I'll make, and then I'll let Phil talk. The law said, and I suspect it will say again, to the commissioners who take an oath, a binding oath, to look at it fairly and without bias. The law said, unless there was an overwhelming reason to disapprove a Secretary of Defense's recommendation, you were to vote for it, to confirm it. That played in many, many, many conversations and votes that we had, that part of the law. The second thing is that when we sent our recommendations forward, not through the Secretary of Defense, but directly to the President either approves them in total or stops the process. It's then sent to the Congress, who must approve them in total or send it back. And that is, in my mind, that's the genius of the whole process. It gives the Congress a cover. It gives the services a cover to do the things, and I don't say that in a pejorative sense. It gives the services a chance to do the things that the services would like to have done, and we can get into this later, would like to have done for years and years and years, but knew they couldn't because of political concerns. And then I've forgotten how long it takes the Congress to approve it. So, and then we were disbanded 1 year almost to the day from the day that we were nominated. So that's the process.
As Tom has just explained, that the time that the commission actually has to work is very short. It's not even a year, as explained, just a few months. So it happens very fast. The department starts a year or more before that. And so to develop the recommendations that the department's going to make to the commission, the Department of Defense has got a lot of work to do. And so you'd say, well, gee, if there's going to be a BRAC in 2015, the department should be starting now. And the reason they're not starting now is the Congress is not allowing them to spend any money on a BRAC for 2015. And as Senator Levin, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, noted recently, the Department of Defense didn't put their money where their mouth is this year, namely 2014. They didn't put any money for BRAC in 2014. They put their money where their mouth will be next year in 2015. And so that, I think, is going to slow down the process some. I predicted after the last BRAC that there wouldn't be another BRAC until every member of Congress who was serving at the time was either out of Congress or had forgotten the last BRAC. And I don't know if my prediction is going to come true. The 2005 BRAC was the first to have been conducted in a decade. So there'd been a long period of time between it and the previous rounds. And if there's one in 2015 or 16, it will now have been another decade since the last round. And 2005 BRAC was the first time when the defense budget was actually going up. The previous BRAC rounds had all been done, 95 and before, had all been done when the defense budget was either going down or scheduled to be going down. And if there is one in 2015, I think you'll have that situation again, where the emphasis will be on cost savings. The 2005 BRAC was mostly about transformation. Secretary Rumsfeld was trying to transform the department, and so there was strong emphasis on transformation. This time, I think it's going to be about saving money pretty much, period.
Can I add that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that that's an important point. If you look at all the 5 BRACs, 2005, which was a lot of, in particular 2005, because we coalesced a lot of things in different places, all the, for lack of a better term, the low-hanging fruit, the little places are gone. The next one, and I think that was to Phil's point about I had the same thought we'd never do another one of these. Because there will be big places close in the next one, and there will be some real gasps out there, in my opinion, in the next time around.
Sir, just one comment to reinforce what you just said. If you go back to 1988 when this all began, there were roughly 500 installations, both large and small, and through those first 5 rounds, roughly 20%, about 100 of those were closed through this process, so 20% reduction to this point. Dr. Morris, I'm going to turn to you now. While all this was taking place, what were we doing in Arlington County?
Gasping. Honestly. Preparation. That is, I can't stress that word more or enough. When the list came out in May 2005, we really did gasp because the impact to Arlington, and again, I stress how large Arlington is, 26 square miles. It is tiny compared to many of the large locations that we compete against. The list of activities from the recommendations of the Secretary were incredible. They were numerous. They affected every service, of course, because we have every service in Arlington, Marines, Navy, Air Force, and Army. And because Army has such a large presence in Arlington, it was absolutely incredible to see the list. It went on and on and on. And as I perused the BRAC law, I found myself just circling the entire page because the entire page was affecting Arlington. And so the first thing that I did was to begin an inventory of who Arlington is, what our markets are, what our economies are, what are we strong in, where are we dominant in, all those types of things, and then of course our weaknesses and the opportunities. And understanding who we were and who we are was the beginning of the first step to understanding the effect of BRAC on us. Arlington is a professional and business services community. That's who we are. We have the intelligence activities. We have the analyst activities. We have all those activities that require that brain power. We don't have any manufacturing, so we knew that that would not be an issue for us. But again, as I began looking at the list from the Secretary, it was the intelligence work that was being caused to leave. It was the research activities, and again, we gasped. So after learning who we are, after really digging into it to understand our economy, I was then able to say, leadership of Arlington, this is where we're going to get hit. This is the effect of that. It's going to remove 17,000 plus jobs from Arlington, which it did. And when you hear a number like that, it does make you cringe, and it did make us cringe. We understood and knew that the brain power was the vital importance to us, and so we began a plan to how do we lobby, and I am going to use that word, how do we lobby the commission? Because we had time before them. We were one of the communities that they did come to. Importantly, and I will stress this, importantly, our state was very much involved. Having that voice at the state level, and if you know anything about the Commonwealth of Virginia, you recognize and know the number of service activities that are within our borders. It's incredible. It's from the north to the south to the east to the west. The state is full of it. So from the state level and the state perspective, we had our representatives there speaking, saying absolutely not. We will do whatever it takes to get this list reduced. So the state level was involved. We had our state legislators involved. We also had our senators and congressional leaders involved. And we did work very, very hard to speak with one voice as much as we could. Yes, there were parochial issues. Yes, there were parochial pieces that we needed to attend to. But most importantly, it was commission. You need to understand the value of having these assets in the Commonwealth of Virginia and then in Arlington specifically. So the collaboration, the partnering, there were meetings and conversations incessantly. I mean, we were putting our heads together, gathering the data. The data was so important to demonstrate and show the product of what came from these assets being in our community. The research activities in particular, DARPA, and DARPA is the baby doll of DOD, I'd like to say, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. A mouthful, whew. But the work that comes from the internet is a product of it. Those kinds of things cannot be undervalued. It was in a location that also housed the Office of Naval Research, as well as Air Force Office of Scientific Research, and then the National Science Foundation. So we had this conglomeration of intelligent, brilliant people working on innovations that affected the global economy. And disrupting that would really hinder a lot of future work. We showed that. We gathered the intelligence. We began our conversations with the agencies themselves. We needed them to be our partners. We needed to collaborate with them. And importantly, we needed to understand the work that they did. So our installations as well got on base, began to build and to continue and solidify the relationships. What is it that you do? Help us to understand what it is that you do so we can be of value to you, so that we can support that, and so that we can hopefully expand the work off base. So there was an on-base activity, and there was an off-base activity, and then there was a collaboration between the two. And that is what allowed us to get before the commissioners and demonstrate the value, at least, of the research activities. And we were able to get those activities removed. And I'll say that again. We were able to get those activities removed because we were able to demonstrate the value of where they are and the work that comes from them. And it was not just one voice. Again, it came from the state to the local to our national. It was only by doing it that way that we were really able to have that success.
And ma'am, I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes and I want to talk a little bit more about that relationship with the state. What I would like to do, and since you have the microphone, I'm going to let you start first, and that is